He cheated on her in public and didn't even hide it. 4 years later, he walked into a flower shop and realized his past had 3 identical blue-eyed faces. The corporate party had been designed to impress, and it succeeded at that far too well. Crystal glasses caught the light from enormous chandeliers, music pulsed softly through the hall, and laughter echoed off polished marble walls. For Daniel Reeves, this world felt effortless. He moved through it with practiced ease, dark hair perfectly styled, blue eyes calm and confident, a man who had learned long ago that admiration followed power like a shadow. Emma Harper stood a few steps behind him, watching. She had worn that dress for him, chosen it carefully, telling herself that tonight mattered. Daniel had insisted she come, had said it was important to be seen together, and she had believed him. She always did. From the outside, they looked like a perfect couple, the brilliant CEO and the woman who stood quietly at his side, smiling when required, adjusting her life around his ambitions without complaint. At first, everything felt normal. Daniel introduced her to investors and partners, his hand resting briefly at her back, his smile familiar and reassuring. Emma tried to ignore the knot in her stomach, the feeling that she was slowly becoming part of the decor rather than his life. She told herself she was imagining things, that success demanded sacrifices, and that love meant patience. Then she saw him. Daniel stood at the bar, laughing too loudly, leaning far too close to a young woman from the marketing department. Emma watched as Daniel placed his hand on the woman's waist, not casually, not accidentally, but with intention. There was no attempt to hide it. No glance over his shoulder. No hesitation. Just entitlement. The woman laughed, tilting her head toward him, fully aware of the attention she was receiving. Emma felt the room spin. She waited for Daniel to notice her standing there, for him to pull away, to remember himself. But he didn't. Instead, he ordered another drink, whispered something into the woman's ear, and smiled in a way Emma hadn't seen directed at her in a long time. People noticed. A few glances shifted toward Emma, then away again, uncomfortable but unsurprised. No one intervened. No one cared enough to. Emma stood frozen, her chest tight, her ears ringing as humiliation settled deep and heavy inside her. She realized with startling clarity that this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was who Daniel had decided to be, and tonight he wasn't even pretending otherwise. She didn't confront him. She didn't raise her voice or demand explanations. Something inside her had gone very quiet. Emma turned, walked past the glittering tables, and left the hall without anyone noticing. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp, cutting through the warmth she had mistaken for love. She stood there for a moment, breathing deeply, steadying herself as the truth settled in. Daniel Reeves would never choose her over his ego. And if she stayed, she would lose more than her dignity. By the time Daniel realized Emma was gone, hours later, she had already made a decision that would change all of their lives. He would never hear about it that night. Or the next. Or even months later. Because some endings don't announce themselves with arguments. Some end quietly, carrying secrets that only reveal their weight years later, in places Daniel Reeves would never expect. Emma did not sleep that night. The apartment felt unnaturally quiet without Daniel's presence, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to break the silence. She sat on the edge of the bed long after midnight, still wearing the dress from the party, her heels abandoned by the door, her makeup untouched because she didn't trust herself to look in the mirror yet. She replayed the evening again and again, not searching for excuses for him, but trying to understand when exactly she had stopped being important. There had been signs long before tonight. Missed dinners. Phone calls taken behind closed doors. Apologies that sounded rehearsed. She had accepted all of it because loving Daniel Reeves meant learning how to shrink. At some point, the humiliation turned into something colder and clearer. Emma stood and walked to the bathroom, finally washing her face, watching the confident woman from the party disappear down the drain. What stared back at her was someone tired but awake in a way she hadn't been for a long time. She understood now that staying would mean accepting public disrespect as a price for comfort, and she was no longer willing to pay it. Daniel didn't come home until morning. She heard the door open quietly, the careful steps of a man who assumed forgiveness was waiting for him by default. He stopped when he saw her sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. "You left early," he said casually, as if commenting on the weather. "Yes," Emma replied. Her voice surprised her by how steady it sounded. Daniel shrugged off his jacket. "You could have said goodbye." She looked up at him then, really looked, and noticed how little concern there was in his expression. No guilt. No apology. Just mild annoyance. "You didn't hide it," she said quietly. Daniel paused for half a second, then smiled, a gesture meant to disarm rather than explain. "It was a party," he replied. "Don't make it bigger than it is." Emma felt something inside her finally give way. "You embarrassed me." Daniel sighed, impatient now. "You're overreacting. This is my world, Emma. You knew that when you chose to be with me." The words settled between them with devastating clarity. "I didn't choose to be invisible," she said. Daniel scoffed softly. "You're being dramatic." Emma stood, pushing the chair back slowly. "No," she said. "I'm being done." For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely surprised. He laughed once, short and dismissive. "You'll calm down." She walked past him without another word and began packing. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't take everything. Only what mattered. Clothes. Documents. A few personal things. Each item felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she had set aside for him. Daniel watched from the doorway, disbelief slowly turning into irritation. "You'll regret this," he said. Emma zipped the suitcase closed and met his gaze. "I already regret staying as long as I did." She left before the conversation could twist itself into something familiar and toxic. The elevator ride down felt endless, but when the doors opened, relief washed over her so suddenly it almost made her dizzy. The weeks that followed were quiet and brutal in equal measure. Emma moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city, far from Daniel's glass towers and curated life. She blocked his number after the third message that sounded more offended than remorseful. Friends reached out, cautiously at first, unsure which version of the story he would tell. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't need to. Then came the morning that changed everything. Emma stood in the bathroom, staring at a pregnancy test she had taken without expectation, almost without thought. The result was unmistakable. She sat down slowly on the edge of the tub, her mind struggling to catch up with her body. Pregnant. Not just pregnant. The doctor confirmed it days later with a calm voice and a careful explanation that confirmed what Emma could hardly process. Triplets. Emma walked out of the clinic in a daze, one hand resting unconsciously on her stomach, her heart racing with fear and something else she hadn't expected at all. Determination. She thought of Daniel. Of his laugh at the party. Of the way he had dismissed her pain as inconvenience. And in that moment, Emma made a decision as clear and final as the one she had made the night she left. She would not go back. She would not beg. She would not expose her children to a man who had already shown her exactly who he was. Daniel Reeves would not hear from her. And 4 years later, standing in a flower shop with 3 little girls holding her hands, she would still know she had chosen the hardest path for the right reasons. The years that followed were the hardest Emma had ever known, and also the most defining. Pregnancy changed her life immediately and without mercy, demanding strength she wasn't sure she possessed yet. Carrying 3 children at once left her exhausted, nauseous, and constantly afraid that something could go wrong. There were nights she lay awake in her small apartment, one hand on her stomach, listening to the city outside and wondering how she had ended up so far from the life she once thought she wanted. She didn't tell Daniel. The decision remained firm even as fear crept in during doctor visits and long, silent evenings. She told herself that knowing him, involving him, would only mean explaining herself, defending her pain, and exposing her children to a man who had already proven how easily he discarded responsibility when it became inconvenient. Whatever loneliness waited for her, it felt safer than that. Her pregnancy was complicated. The doctor insisted on rest, frequent monitoring, and warned her gently that triplets often came early. Emma reduced her work hours, then stopped altogether. Savings vanished faster than she expected, replaced by medical bills and practical necessities she had never imagined buying alone. Some friends faded away, uncomfortable with the weight of her reality. Others surprised her by staying, offering quiet support without asking too many questions. When the contractions came, they came suddenly and without warning. Emma barely made it to the hospital in time. The delivery was long and terrifying, marked by bright lights, urgent voices, and moments when fear threatened to overwhelm her completely. When it was finally over, she lay shaking and exhausted as 3 tiny cries filled the room, each one piercing and miraculous. 3 girls. Identical, fragile, and impossibly small. Dark hair, soft and damp against their heads, and eyes that would one day open into a color she already recognized even before she saw it clearly. Emma cried then, not from pain, but from something deeper and more overwhelming. Relief. Love. Responsibility crashing into her all at once. The months that followed blurred together into a cycle of sleepless nights, feeding schedules, and constant worry. Emma learned how to function on exhaustion, how to hold 2 babies while soothing the third, how to measure time not in hours but in small victories. There were moments she nearly broke, moments when the silence of the apartment pressed in so tightly it felt unbearable. But she didn't break. She adapted. She found work she could do from home, took shifts when the girls slept, and learned to ask for help without shame when her strength ran thin. Slowly, the apartment filled with signs of life, tiny clothes drying on racks, toys scattered across the floor, laughter replacing fear in unexpected moments. As the girls grew, their similarities became impossible to ignore. They shared the same blue eyes, the same expressions, the same instinctive way of moving through the world together. People commented on it constantly, strangers smiling and asking questions Emma answered politely but briefly. She never said his name. The girls learned her name first, then each other's, then the rhythm of a home built on consistency and quiet resilience. Emma taught them kindness, honesty, and the importance of choosing themselves even when it was hard. She taught them that love was shown through presence, not promises. At night, when the girls slept curled together, Emma sometimes allowed herself to feel the ache of what might have been. Not regret, but recognition of a life that could have looked easier from the outside. Those moments passed quickly. The reality she had built, though demanding, was real and earned. 4 years went by. The girls became confident, curious, and inseparable, their laughter filling spaces Emma once thought would always feel empty. She no longer felt like she was surviving. She was living. And she believed, with quiet certainty, that the past was behind her. She had no way of knowing that a simple errand, a visit to a flower shop on an ordinary afternoon, would soon place that past directly in front of her again, along with questions she had hoped would never need answers. The flower shop was small and bright, tucked between a cafe and a bookstore Emma liked to visit with the girls on quiet afternoons. It smelled of fresh greenery and water, a clean, calming scent that always made her slow down. The girls stood close together near the display of tulips, whispering excitedly as they compared colors, their identical faces lighting up in the same expressions at the same time. Emma smiled despite herself. Moments like this made the years of struggle feel distant, almost unreal. She reached for a bouquet of white lilies, already thinking about where she would place them at home, when she sensed someone behind her. It wasn't a sound or a movement, but a shift in the air, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. She turned slightly, expecting to see another customer waiting. Instead, she saw Daniel. For a fraction of a second, her mind refused to accept it. He looked older, more serious, the sharp confidence she remembered tempered by something heavier in his eyes, but there was no mistaking him. Dark hair, blue eyes, the same presence that once filled every room he entered. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Daniel stood frozen near the entrance, a bouquet already in his hand, his gaze fixed not on Emma, but on the girls. His expression changed slowly, confusion giving way to shock, then to something dangerously close to recognition. Emma watched his face drain of color as his eyes moved from one child to the next, taking in their identical features, the dark hair, the unmistakable blue eyes. Her heart began to pound. One of the girls noticed him staring and tilted her head. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice curious rather than afraid, "that man is looking at us." Emma swallowed and forced herself to turn fully toward him. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything she had built to keep the past at a distance cracked open. Daniel took a step forward without realizing it. "Emma," he said, her name sounding unfamiliar in his mouth. She didn't answer right away. Her body moved on instinct, her hand tightening around the girls, drawing them closer without making it obvious. "We're leaving," she said softly, more to them than to him. The girls protested gently, still focused on the flowers, but Emma guided them toward the door, her movements calm and controlled despite the storm raging inside her. She almost made it. "Wait," Daniel said, his voice strained. "Please." She stopped. The girls turned to look at her, sensing the shift in her tone. Emma crouched slightly, meeting their eyes. "Give me a moment," she said gently. "Stay right here." They nodded, obedient but alert, holding onto each other's hands as she stepped a short distance away with Daniel, far enough to speak quietly but close enough to keep them in sight. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Are they?" Daniel began, then stopped, unable to finish. Emma met his gaze steadily. "Yes." The word landed heavily between them. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, his breath unsteady. "How old are they?" "4," she replied. "All of them?" His eyes flicked back to the girls, who were now watching them openly, three identical faces filled with innocent curiosity. "Triplets," he said hoarsely. Emma nodded. "You figured it out." Daniel laughed softly, a sound edged with disbelief and pain. "Why didn't you tell me?" The question hit exactly where she expected it to, and she was ready. "Because you showed me who you were," she said quietly. "And I believed you." His jaw tightened. "That night. I was wrong." "That night wasn't a mistake," Emma replied. "It was a decision. And I made mine afterward." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Around them, the shop continued as if nothing extraordinary were happening, the clerk arranging flowers, the bell over the door chiming softly as customers came and went. Daniel looked at her again, really looked, and something shifted in his expression. Guilt, regret, and something close to fear surfaced all at once. "They're my daughters," he said, not a question this time. "Yes," Emma answered. "They are." Before he could say more, one of the girls tugged at Emma's sleeve. "Mom, can we go now?" Emma nodded immediately. She turned back to Daniel, her voice firm but calm. "This isn't the place. And this isn't a conversation we're having in front of them." Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Please," he said. "Just let me talk to you." Emma studied him for a long moment, weighing the cost of reopening a door she had spent years sealing shut. Finally, she reached into her bag, pulled out a small card, and handed it to him. "1 hour," she said. "Tomorrow. Somewhere public." Daniel took the card as if it were fragile. "Thank you," he said quietly. Emma didn't respond. She took her daughter's hands and led them out of the shop, the bell chiming softly behind them. Daniel stood alone among the flowers, staring after them, the weight of 4 lost years settling heavily on his shoulders. For Emma, every step away from the shop felt like walking deeper into uncertainty. She had built a life without him. Now the past had found her again, and there was no turning back. Emma chose the cafe deliberately. It was busy enough to prevent raised voices, bright enough to keep shadows away, and familiar enough that she could leave at any moment without feeling trapped. She arrived early with the girls, ordering juice for them and coffee for herself, watching them sit at the small table and argue softly about whose straw was whose. Their presence grounded her, even as her nerves tightened with every passing minute. Daniel arrived exactly on time. He hesitated just inside the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes found them. The moment he saw the girls, something in his posture shifted, as if his body recognized them before his mind fully caught up. Emma watched him approach, noting how much more careful his movements were now, how the confidence she remembered had been replaced by restraint. "Hi," he said quietly, stopping a few steps away. "Sit," Emma replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. She did not introduce him. She did not explain. The girls looked at him openly, curious and unafraid. Daniel sat down slowly, his gaze moving from one girl to the next, as if afraid that staring too long might be inappropriate, or worse, unwanted. "I'm Daniel," he said gently. One of the girls leaned closer to her sisters and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He really does look like us." Emma closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Girls, this is someone I used to know," she said calmly. "You can say hello if you want." They did, in unison, 3 soft hellos that struck Daniel harder than any accusation ever could. He nodded back, unable to trust his voice. Emma waited until the girls were distracted by their drinks before turning to him. "You have questions," she said. "I'll answer what I can. But you don't get to interrogate me, and you don't get to upset them." Daniel nodded immediately. "I understand." "Good," she said. "Then start with listening." He took a breath. "I didn't know," he said, "about any of this. I would have." Emma raised a hand, stopping him gently but firmly. "You don't get to rewrite the past. We're not here to discuss what you might have done." Daniel swallowed. "Then what are we here to discuss?" She met his eyes steadily. "What happens now?" The simplicity of the statement seemed to unbalance him. "I want to be part of their lives," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want the chance to earn it. Emma studied his face for a long moment. This isn't about you earning something from me, she replied. It's about what's best for them. He nodded again, slower this time. Tell me what that looks like. That question surprised her more than any apology could have. She leaned back slightly, considering her answer. It looks like patience. Boundaries. Consistency. It looks like you not making promises you can't keep. I won't, he said quietly. You don't know that yet, Emma replied. And neither do I. One of the girls climbed onto Emma's lap, wrapping her arms around her neck. Mom, who is he really? Emma hesitated, then answered carefully. He's someone important from before. Daniel's chest tightened, but he said nothing. They talked for nearly an hour, mostly about logistics. Schedules. School. What the girls liked and didn't like. Emma spoke plainly, without emotion or accusation, and Daniel listened as if every word were fragile and permanent. When it was time to leave, Daniel stood and took a step back, giving the girls space. It was nice meeting you, he said softly. One of them waved. Another smiled shyly. The third simply watched him, thoughtful and quiet. Outside, Daniel stopped beside Emma. Thank you for meeting me, he said. I know this isn't easy. No, Emma replied. It isn't. He hesitated. May I see them again? Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked at her daughters, then back at him. If we do this, she said, we do it slowly. On their terms. And the moment I believe this will hurt them, it stops. I accept that, Daniel said without hesitation. She nodded once. Then we'll see. As Emma walked away with the girls, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto her shoulders, heavier now with uncertainty but also threaded with something she hadn't expected. Possibility. She didn't trust it yet. She didn't welcome it. But for the first time since the night she walked out of that corporate party, she allowed herself to acknowledge that the future was no longer entirely hers to control, and that frightened her almost as much as it intrigued her. The weeks that followed unfolded cautiously, as if everyone involved understood that one careless step could undo everything before it truly began. Daniel did not appear unannounced, did not flood Emma with messages, and did not try to force his way into the girls' lives with grand gestures. Instead, he waited for permission, for direction, for signs that his presence was wanted rather than merely tolerated. Emma noticed the restraint immediately. They met again in public places at first, parks and quiet cafes, spaces where the girls felt comfortable and where Daniel could observe without overwhelming them. He sat on the ground when they played, listened when they spoke, and never corrected Emma in front of them. He followed her lead carefully, sometimes awkwardly, as if learning a language he had never needed before. The girls reacted differently to him, each in her own way. Ava was the boldest, asking direct questions with disarming honesty. She wanted to know where he lived, what he did, and why he had the same eyes as them. Daniel answered simply, without embellishment, never promising more than he could give. Lily was quieter, staying close to Emma, watching Daniel from a safe distance, absorbing his tone and movements before deciding whether to trust him. Mia lingered somewhere in between, curious but cautious, studying him with a seriousness that made Daniel unexpectedly nervous. Emma watched it all with a mix of vigilance and exhaustion. Allowing Daniel into their routine meant reopening wounds she had carefully sealed. It meant answering questions she had avoided for years and confronting the reality that her daughters were no longer protected by distance alone. At night, after the girls fell asleep, she lay awake replaying every interaction, every word Daniel spoke, searching for signs of arrogance or entitlement. She found none. Instead, she found effort, consistency, and something that unsettled her deeply, remorse that did not demand forgiveness. The turning point came quietly. One afternoon, one of the girls fell ill at kindergarten. It wasn't serious, but the call came in the middle of a work task Emma couldn't abandon immediately. Without thinking too much about it, she called Daniel. He arrived before she did. When Emma reached the clinic, she found him sitting on a small plastic chair, one of the girls curled against his chest, half asleep, his arm wrapped around her protectively. He looked up when he saw Emma, relief softening his expression. "She's okay," he said quietly. "Just tired." Something in Emma's chest tightened painfully. Later that evening, after the girls were asleep, Emma finally allowed herself to speak the fear she had been carrying. "They'll get attached," she said softly. "And if this falls apart, I don't know how to explain that to them." Daniel didn't interrupt. When he did speak, his voice was steady. "I'm not here to visit," he said. "I'm here to stay, if you'll let me." Emma met his gaze. "Staying is easy when it's convenient." "I know," he replied. "That's why I won't disappear when it isn't." The cost of that promise became clear soon enough. Daniel's professional life began pushing back. His focus shifted. Meetings ended early. Calls went unanswered. His name appeared less often in headlines, and when it did, the tone was different. People questioned his commitment. His board questioned his priorities. He listened. And for the first time in his life, he didn't fight to be understood by people who would never matter as much as the 3 little girls who now waited for him to show up. When Emma learned what he was giving up, guilt twisted sharply inside her. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly one evening. "I never asked you to." Daniel shook his head. "I'm not doing this for you," he replied. "I'm doing it because I can't unknow them." Emma said nothing, but the walls she had built began to shift, not collapsing, but opening in small, careful ways. By the end of that month, Daniel had become part of their routine. Not a hero. Not a savior. Just someone who showed up when expected and stayed when it was hard. Emma understood then that the most dangerous thing about Daniel's return wasn't the pain he had caused in the past. It was the possibility that this time, he might actually be worthy of the place he was slowly, patiently earning. The shift became impossible to ignore once Daniel's choices began to ripple outward, beyond parks and cafes and into the structures he had built his life around. His calendar changed first. Meetings were rescheduled or declined. Travel plans were shortened, then cancelled entirely. He stopped answering calls during dinner hours and no longer apologized for it. At first, no one challenged him openly. Then the questions started, carefully phrased as concern, framed as advice from people who had benefited from his ambition for years. Daniel listened without interrupting, his expression calm in a way that unsettled them more than anger ever could have. He had spent most of his life convincing others that control was the same as strength. Now he was learning that choosing limits required far more courage. At home, the girls felt the difference in ways they couldn't articulate. Daniel's presence had become reliable, not exciting or uncertain, but expected. Ava began asking if he would walk them to school on certain mornings, her voice confident, already assuming the answer. Lily waited for him before starting dinner games, arranging her toys until he arrived. Mia watched everything closely, still cautious, but no longer distant. She leaned against him during story time, her head resting briefly on his arm as if testing whether he would pull away. Emma noticed it all, and with every passing day, the weight of responsibility pressed harder against her chest. She had spent years protecting her daughters from disappointment by limiting what they were allowed to hope for. Allowing Daniel this close meant acknowledging that hope had returned whether she wanted it or not. The pressure reached a breaking point during a board meeting Daniel had delayed twice already. The tone was polite but unmistakably sharp. His availability was questioned. His focus scrutinized. The implication was clear. The version of Daniel Reeves they had built their expectations around no longer existed, and they were not prepared to accommodate the change. "We need clarity," one of them said. "You can't lead like this." Daniel folded his hands on the table, his voice even. "This is how I lead now." The silence that followed was heavy. Later that evening, Daniel told Emma everything. They sat at her kitchen table while the girls slept, the apartment quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Emma listened, her hands wrapped around a mug she had forgotten to drink from. "They're giving you a choice," she said quietly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "And I already know my answer." Fear tightened her chest. "You don't have to sacrifice everything." Daniel met her gaze steadily. "I already sacrificed the wrong things once." The consequences came faster than either of them expected. Within days, the story reached the press. Headlines twisted facts into speculation, framing Daniel's absence as weakness, his change in priorities as a liability. Commentators debated whether redemption was possible for a man who had once built his success on relentless control. Emma tried to shield the girls from it, but children sensed tension even when words were carefully chosen. Ava asked why people were talking about Daniel on the radio. Lily worried that he wouldn't come anymore. Mia grew quiet again, her trust retreating just enough to make Emma's chest ache. Daniel responded the only way he knew how. He showed up. He arrived early. He stayed late. He attended school events and doctor appointments, held hands during walks, listened to stories he had already heard a dozen times without checking his phone. When the noise outside grew louder, he made their world smaller and steadier. One evening, as the girls were getting ready for bed, Ava looked up at him with sudden seriousness. "You're not leaving, right?" Daniel knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes without hesitation. "No," he said. "I'm not." Lily watched closely, searching his face for doubt, and found none. Mia reached out then, taking his hand, her grip small but firm. After the girls were asleep, Emma stood alone in the doorway of their room, overwhelmed by a realization she could no longer avoid. Daniel had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He had chosen them publicly, visibly, in ways that carried real consequences. "You changed your life," she said quietly when he joined her. Daniel shook his head. "I finally aligned it." Emma looked at him then, truly looked, and felt something inside her shift. Not forgiveness, not romance, but trust beginning to form in a place she had kept sealed for years. The world outside continued to judge and speculate, but inside that small apartment, something irreversible had taken place. Daniel Reeves was no longer a risk she was managing. He was becoming a constant she had to learn how to accept. The quiet that followed the storm felt unfamiliar at first, as if all of them were waiting for something else to fall apart. Days passed without new headlines, without urgent calls, without the constant tension that had lived just beneath the surface for months. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became steady, and that steadiness changed everything. Daniel's days took on a new rhythm. He still worked, but the work no longer defined him. He chose projects that allowed him to remain present, to leave his phone face down during dinner, to walk the girls to school when the mornings were bright and slow. He learned their routines the way he once memorized market data, not because he needed control, but because he cared. He knew which one needed reassurance before bedtime, which one pretended not to be scared during thunderstorms, which one always wanted her story read twice. The girls changed too. Ava stopped asking if Daniel would come back and began assuming that he would. Lily grew more talkative, her laughter returning in soft bursts that filled the apartment. Mia, the most cautious of the three, finally let herself relax. She climbed into Daniel's lap during movie nights, fell asleep against his shoulder, and one evening, without ceremony or announcement, called him Dad. The word settled into the room gently, without shock or expectation, and Daniel felt his breath catch as if his body had been waiting years to hear it. Emma stood in the doorway when it happened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct anyone. She simply watched as Daniel froze for a moment, then wrapped his arms around Mia carefully, reverently, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. Emma felt tears blur her vision, not from pain, but from the quiet realization that something irreversible had just occurred. Later that night, when the girls were asleep, Emma and Daniel sat together in the living room, the lights dim, the city humming softly outside the windows. "I didn't plan for this," Emma said quietly. "Any of it?" Daniel nodded. "Neither did I." She turned to him. "I was so afraid of letting you back in that I forgot to ask myself what staying closed was costing us." Daniel met her gaze, his voice low and sincere. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just want to keep choosing this. Every day." Emma studied him for a long moment, searching for the man she had once loved, the man who had hurt her deeply, and the man who sat before her now. What she found wasn't perfection or certainty. It was effort. Consistency. Accountability without performance. "That's all I ever wanted," she said finally. Spring arrived quietly. They moved through the season together, weekends at the park, birthdays celebrated without excess, laughter filling rooms that once felt too empty. The past did not disappear. It softened, reshaped by honesty and time, becoming part of their story rather than a wound that defined it. One afternoon, they returned to the same flower shop where everything had come apart and begun again. The girls ran ahead, choosing flowers with loud opinions and identical smiles. Daniel watched them, his expression open and unguarded. Emma stood beside him, her hand brushing his without hesitation. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think that night destroyed everything." Daniel looked at her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I think it showed me who we needed to become." He nodded, understanding. They left the shop together, for shadows stretching across the sidewalk in the late afternoon sun. There was no grand declaration, no dramatic ending waiting for them. Just a family built slowly, imperfectly, and deliberately. Sometimes a betrayal breaks a life apart. And sometimes, when responsibility is finally accepted, it becomes the moment everything truly begins.